The European Union's drug regulator is reviewing possible links between the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine that was given to people who later suffered blood clots. The regulator is also probing a new condition linked to the AstraZeneca vaccine. 4 cases of rare clots with low blood platelets were reported among those vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson shot. The European Medicines Agency said in a statement, 1 of the patients died and 5 cases of people suffering a rare condition in which tiny blood vessels leak after patients given the AstraZeneca shot have been reported. This caused swelling and a drop in their blood pressure. HIV and COVID-19 expert Professor Musa Mushabela joins us now to talk more about this. Prof, good evening and thank you so much for your time tonight. How worried should we be?
It's a good question to start with when you were shooting straight to the heart of it. My view is that we should pay attention. At this point, I think that we should not necessarily be too worried because it is such a rare event. And I want to emphasize this, and because on the one hand, I think people are going to receive this news as if, this is happening to everyone who takes the vaccine, and this is not the case. And in general, we know that with any medical product, one needs to take it knowing what the risks are, but also we should not take the very rare risks that are there and make them come across as if they are very common risks. And for that reason, I think that we are paying attention, we are monitoring, we need to see what this means. I'm quite relieved that for AstraZeneca, they have agreed to register the blood clots as one of the rare events so that people can know when they have to take the vaccine. So I hope that answers your first question.
It certainly does. So certainly we can't afford then to dismiss these reports.
Absolutely, and I think it would be reckless and irresponsible when you were to dismiss them. I think that ever since the cases of blood clots were reported with the AstraZeneca vaccine, we have been following those assessments and evaluations, and it is understandable. I think also it's important that people don't take it as though they are being misled because these adverse events were not found during the clinical trials. I think with the Johnson & Johnson, what they are reporting now is that there was only one event in a clinical trial of nearly 40,000 people that happened. And when you look at that and you compare it with the 4 events that they found out of 4.5 million people that they had vaccinated in the US, so you can see that it is a rare event, and really we must not make it come across as if, because I know this creates an opportunity for people who push conspiracy theories to say that, this is being hidden. No, in the clinical trials it wasn't. It is such a rare event that you only begin to see it when you go to scale. And right now it's almost as if there is, at the back, with the back of the envelope calculation, there is one event in about 1 to 2 million vaccinations.
And while the European Medicines Agency has said that it is not yet clear that, there might be a causal association between AstraZeneca and, Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines, but would we be surprised if it might be found later that there may be some links here?
Okay, so this is a very important question you're asking, because I think in medical terms and in scientific terms, when we use the word cause, it's a very specific use of the word. That means that you can prove a causal relationship between those two. And I think sometimes we forget that in layman's terms, when we use cause, we just kind of use it very loosely. The word that is being used at the moment is that it will be association, because association means that you could be allowing for a loose association without necessarily establishing what we call causality. So that, I think, for me, is important, the way you're asking that question about the causal link and what a causal link, and if it meets the criteria for a causal link, which are very specific in epidemiological terms. So that is important. But to answer your question, that might we be surprised later on if it is established that there's a causal link? No, we wouldn't be. But I also need to caution that we may not get to that point. And the reason we may not get to that point is because these events are so rare that it becomes difficult. You need to prove that causal link, you need to have enough sample size. So we may get to a point where we don't really have the sample size that is required to prove causality. But I think it is the responsible thing to say that we are observing these events and we need to put it down as a caution based on the possible association that we have observed. That I think it is quite acceptable.
And let's talk then about, the credibility then of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because some are saying then that, there might be now a cloud that may be cast over this particular vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I am not too concerned about that. I think that the cloud that would be cast on the vaccine would exist if in South Africa, for example, the cloud that we cast over the AstraZeneca vaccine was based on the side effects of blood clots. But this was not the case. It just so happened coincidentally, South Africa was concerned about the variant. And the cloud that we generated around AstraZeneca vaccine were concerns around the extent to which the AstraZeneca vaccine would have efficacy against the variant. This was not the concern with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The issue of blood clots came later. And to be fair, it was not really even adequately entertained in South Africa because there was no need. However, when it comes to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I think that the issue of the blood clots is relatively new. It is something that is being established. It should not cast a cloud, but it should actually help us to be able to infuse responsibility in the way that we use this vaccine and the kind of things we have to monitor. Remember, we monitor based on what we know is the risk. If we don't know the risk, then we don't monitor, we don't intervene early. So when we know that there is this risk, it helps us to put in place measures to monitor accordingly.
Prof, these are unprecedented times, and certainly a lot had to be done to try and alleviate the situation that the globe finds itself in. Do you then think that given the time, the short time that countries had to, even scientists had to develop these vaccines, could then, could it be possible then that some health issues may have been overlooked here in order to try and find a solution, to the COVID-19 pandemic?
No, I think it's not that processes have been overlooked. I think that what we could say in this case is that we may not have had enough time to observe, to slowly scale up. So imagine if we were scaling up at a slower rate and we begin to pick up clots and then we stop and we wait, we monitor, we have time, if we had the liberty of time. But I can give you an example. Before I give you an example, I think the point here is that we didn't have that liberty of time, but there were no processes that were flouted. These things are being found because of the huge numbers in millions. We all know this. The clots with AstraZeneca vaccine, they were found after a few cases out of nearly 18 million. The ones in the US with Johnson & Johnson, it's 4.5 million people vaccinated, and you've got 3 or 4 cases that are identified. So it's only during scale that you begin to find very, very rare events. So I want to give an example with the HIV. HIV unfolded, the treatment for HIV, antiretroviral treatment, unfolded much more slowly over time compared to these vaccines for COVID-19. But you would remember that there were drugs that we used early on that had side effects. I remember a drug called nevirapine, a very, in a way, a drug with poor profile in terms of side effects that caused liver disease. And when we had to use it, but because we knew that there were those problems, we monitored for it and we intervened, when we needed to intervene. But we had no other choice but to use it. So it becomes difficult, when you are dealing with a pandemic like COVID-19, and you know that the vaccine gives you a better option, because we should remember that COVID-19 causes clots, and you have a much, much higher proportion of clots with COVID-19 itself done with the vaccine. And this is not to justify that it's okay to use the vaccine. I recognize that for that one person who's going to get the clots, for them it's 100%. It's not a small rare event. For them, it's 100%. So I recognize that, and I really think that it's important to be responsible in how we use them, to disclose completely, tell everybody what the risks are, and to put in place measures to provide insurance, so that whenever there are these damages, that people can be compensated. Not that it will make up for a life, but it will be something.
Prof, I tell you, this is a rock and a hard place indeed, but it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your insights tonight. That's HIV and COVID-19 expert, Professor Musa Moshabela. Thank you so much for your time.